All right, next up. So questions for CS2. So this was a question that was posed in a LinkedIn thread on someone else's post where it was the original post was around how funnel. It wasn't like funnels are dead, but it was along those lines. It's like funnels are stupid. It's an old way of looking at things. The buyer's journey is more complex. And so to give everyone a bit of a background, me and Chrissy, we agree with this mostly. And we've always struggled, and Chrissy, you had a post about this recently. When we think about tracking kind of the sales process funnel, right? Like sales ready, meeting, pipeline, one. What do you call that? Is it lifecycle? When back in the day with Marketo, you had like the lifecycle modeler and everything. Do you call it revenue cycle? Like, do you call it pipeline? Do you call it the funnel? And recently we've been calling it funnel, but I think the question was
waterfall.
Yeah, I mean, so bow tie funnel. Like basically, it's an interesting question. Like, what do you call this? And I think our point of view is like slowly evolving. And when we think about this question of like what is the right terminology for this, and like what are some of the nuances that kind of lead you towards calling it something, it's like, and maybe you take this question, it's like, what is the perfect term that the majority of people can understand intuitively? And maybe the last thing I'll say on this is that a lot of people get confused with funnel, because in this post was not even talking about this sales funnel. It was talking about like, okay, someone fills out a form and then you send them a piece of content, and kind of you think you know where they are in the buyer's journey by putting them through this like content experience funnel. So yeah, what is a better term? Like, what is the right way of thinking about like what we think of as something that starts with sales ready?
Well, I think we had a conversation on it, so I feel like I've maybe been like swayed in a little bit direction. I think before that, I was kind of still like using life cycle because it implied that there was like, you go through it again and you'd have another journey. Then I was like, journey, okay, it's more of a buyer's journey and how we're measuring that. But I think when we talked about using the term pipeline, that's something also that interests me, especially when you think about, okay, if we think about a pipeline only starting once that's hit like marketing forecast, that's too late. That's almost like
you mean sales forecast?
Sorry, sales forecast. Yeah. And so, but for us, when we think of things, you want to measure it for once it becomes sales ready. And that could also include not just being sales ready from marketing, but sales saying something's ready, they're going to start a funnel, or a partner saying something is ready for sales, right? Basically, this is ready to be prosecuted, right? And so when we think about that, okay, maybe it's that pipeline actually starts there. Yes, it doesn't have a dollar amount tied to it. It's maybe not in a sales forecast, but that's when things start happening, right? You start moving into working, someone's following up, then they're booking a meeting and so forth. And so when you posted it, like, oh, should this be called a pipeline? And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Because when you think about it too, so when we tie attribution, funnel attribution, we'll call it that. But in this case, pipeline attribution, in some ways, we're saying, what was that tipping point? Like, where did it start? What was like that entry point to start it? And you gave the example of like an oil like mine. Okay, yes, that oil could have came from somewhere else, and maybe don't exactly know exactly where, but where it actually entered that pipeline to hit the end goal was there. And you can, yes, it might go different directions and whatnot, but you also have an end goal of like close one. So I like in my head, I'm like, oh, I like that as pipeline, but it doesn't start that late. And I think that also ties better to a buyer's journey and how we want to service that buyer. Because by the time now they become sales ready, it's probably more or less likely the same way that someone was when they hit into a forecasted opportunity back in the day, just because so many people are doing their research earlier and they have an idea of what they want to buy before they're even talking to someone. And that's why I think it's important to measure that. measure it earlier and measure it when they start, getting sent over to sales. And then, so yeah, so I mean, I like pipeline, and I think that when we think about pipeline, though, we have to be mindful that some people think of pipeline of like, do you have a dollar amount tied to an opportunity? Is it past 0%? Is it in your forecast? And to me, that feels like forecast. And also, I've realized recently, like, it is a bit tough to just say, oh, enter a dollar amount so early. Like, sometimes people don't even think opportunities are real unless they have a dollar amount. And for me, I've been selling recently. I'm like, if we're waiting for that point, you're way too effing late, way too late.
Yeah. So the thing I liked about funnel is that it implies a conversion rate, and like less people make it to the next stage.
Yeah.
But the problem with funnel is that there's so many different uses of it.
Yeah.
It's not language that sales speaks. It's not language that the CEO speaks, or investors particularly speak in, maybe some. Everyone talks about pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone knows what pipeline, or has an idea of what pipeline is, that it's important, we need more of it. And that is the language. The nuance that I think that we are bringing to this is that pipeline shouldn't, if we're thinking about relabeling funnel to pipeline doesn't start when there is an opportunity with a dollar amount, like you talked about. Mm-hmm. Pipeline should start at the sales ready point, at that handoff to SDR, BDR. So then we can track it all the way through, and we know where did that pipeline come from at that stage, at the tipping point, and then we can see what are the conversion rates all the way through, and not just like the win rate of the opportunity from forecast.
Yeah.
And that gives you just more insight. And I really like that as a label and a way of thinking about it, because at least with pipeline, when you think about it compared to funnel, if you misunderstand what I'm talking about there, when I say the word pipeline, and you only think about kind of, okay, it's in forecast, there's a dollar amount, there's an opportunity in Salesforce, whatever, fine, you're still in the ballpark of what I'm talking about, because that's the important part. That's a really important part of the pipeline process. If you misunderstand what I'm talking about with funnel, and you think, oh, there's like anonymous people who convert on the website and then get into kind of our gated asset or whatever funnel, that is so far away from what we're talking about when we talk about funnel, that if I had to choose like which version of misunderstanding I have to choose, I would choose the pipeline one. So I think we should start thinking about this tipping point sales ready to closed one process as pipeline, and really try and educate people on pipeline. The pipeline doesn't just start that late in an opportunity cycle. It starts and the handover to SDR, and we want to track conversion rates from that point onwards. And I think that, and then just the fact that it's pipeline, and it's kind of a typical kind of sales word, I think that just gets sales on board. Like, we're creating pipeline for you, right? We're not sending you MQLs, we're creating pipeline for you. It's like, or it's aligning marketing, SDR, and sales around creating pipeline, not just funnels or life cycles. Yeah. So I like it. I'm interested if anyone listening to this has a perspective too.
Yeah. Because I think we're just one of those, like, instead of just throwing the baby out with the bathwater, it's like, oh, funnels are stupid. It's more like, okay, this is like complex. In some ways, you want to also use the terminology that some people are using, especially in a market, especially when you're a consultant. But also, you don't want people to make assumptions based on the terminology. That's why it's really hard for us, because in some ways, when you say, oh, I'm tracking a funnel, it's like, oh, everything starts at like known, and then and it's like, in some ways, but you can enter that opportunity, and we can still track back those stages. Also, to say that you don't need a measurement model at all in some ways like that, to me, is wrong, because, well, what about all the opportunities that sales created? Don't you want to actually know, like, what happened before that? Like, if you're just tracking it for once it becomes an opportunity, like, you're missing out on a big part of the picture. And like I said, it's even more useful this early. So yeah.
Pipeline it is.
For now.
All right. I think we're at the end of the agenda here. So thank you all for listening to this. I hope it was useful, insightful. Let us know if you have a question you want us to tackle in the third segment. We're going to be doing these every week and breaking it down into these 3 segments where we go through the breakdown, like one of the big things that we're seeing in our industry, the GTM or GTFO, where Chrissy or I are going to bring something for the other one to react to and say if we like it or not, and then answer a question from the audience or a question that we saw on LinkedIn or something maybe internally that our team brought up. So hope you're enjoying it. Let us know and we'll catch you on the next one.